Every goodbye began with brown suitcases, tied shut with string, carried to the train. You dodged pigeons, wishing for more time. Hugs were quick, tears stayed silent. Words left unsaid, only enough spoken, then they vanished behind the glass. Brothers, cousins, uncles, sent wherever the army called. A Christmas tree glowed in the corner, bulbs hot and bright. Heavy silver tinsel shimmered like magic. The house smelled of pine and baking. Oranges and stockings, ribbon candy in bowls, Bing Crosby on the radio. Life was simple. Lights, love, and the hope everyone came home. Women dressed sharp, even for groceries. Hats pinned, gloves white, lipstick fresh. It wasn't showing off. It was self-respect. Even the grocer tipped his cap. Meat was rationed, but dignity wasn't. A trip to Sears felt special. Never just an errand. Catalog in hand, maybe a malt afterward. Even wandering aisles felt grand, like stepping into the city. And if you rode the escalator, you were fancy. Gas was 15 cents a gallon, but ration stamps mattered more. Dad gripped the wheel, muttering about saving fuel. Still, Sunday drives happened. Short, but they felt like freedom. Windows showed blue stars, some gold. Even as kids, you knew the meaning. You just walked quieter. Sometimes you caught a mother's stare, still behind the curtains. That star said everything without a word. Evenings gathered around the radio. The warm guile lit faces. FDR's voice calm, steady, close. Not like a president, like a neighbor. Silence filled the house, because his voice made hope possible. That old tin can on the stove didn't hold bacon grease for frying eggs. It was wartime, and grease was gold. Mom saved it for the government, scraping every last bit in with a spoon. You'd watch it cool into something jelly-like, wondering how on earth it helped fight a war. But you didn't ask. You just helped scrape and saluted the smell of breakfast, doing its part. Out behind the house, rows of tomatoes, stretched beside snap peas and marigolds. All part of your family's victory garden. It wasn't just about saving money. It was about doing your bit. You watered with care, picked with pride, and knew that every bite meant one less ration coupon. Even weeds got patriotic treatment. That little garden fed more than stomachs. It fed hope. When a new ration book arrived, you'd open it like a letter from the president himself. The paper had a stiff metallic scent, like coins and glue. Every stamp inside meant something real. Sugar, butter, shoes. You guarded it like treasure, and heaven help you if you tore one out early. That little booklet ran the household, and even kids knew not to lose it. Going to the movies wasn't just about cartoons and cowboy heroes. First came the newsreel. Grainy black and white film showed tanks rolling, flags rising, and battles far away. You'd sit tall trying to understand what was happening overseas. It was history and Hollywood in one. Then came the cartoon, and the laughter returned, but not before everyone clapped for the news. You'd run barefoot through the alleyways, gravel underfoot and summer heat in your hair. Houses were packed in close. Little boxes built before the war, painted dull green or white. You knew every shortcut, every neighbor's dog, and which fence you could hop. Streets weren't dangerous. They were home. The call for supper was your curfew, and the alley was your kingdom. You'd watch your dad shave slow and steady, standing at the mirror with a ceramic mug full of warm lather. He'd swirl that brush like he was painting a masterpiece, drag that straight razor along his jaw, and dab his face with a towel that smelled like Old Spice and steam. Nobody rushed it. That was his moment, and you stayed quiet to honor it. Church basement turned into knitting circles. Moms, grandmas, and even a few dads sat in folding chairs, stitching socks and scarves for the boys overseas. You'd hear quiet murmurs, the clicking of needles, and maybe a prayer. Kids helped roll yarn or hold patterns. It wasn't glamorous, but it mattered. Every stitch was a little hope, tucked inside a duffel bag. Before refrigerators came around, you had the icebox and the Iceman. He knew every house on the route and every kid by name. You'd hear his truck run out, and sometimes score a chip of ice to suck on. He'd haul the block in with tongs, slide it into the chest, and nod like a hero. For 5 minutes, your kitchen was Alaska. You wore your older brother's shirts and your cousin's coat and didn't think twice. Fashion didn't mean much when the world was at war. Patches on the knees, that just meant it still had life. And if these stories still feel alive, don't forget to subscribe so the memories keep coming home. Moms hemmed and let out seams like it was an art. A dress wasn't old until it couldn't be fixed. And even then it became rags or dull clothes. At night, the distant sound of a train whistle carried across the fields. You'd lie in bed and wonder, was your brother on that train? Your uncle, somebody's boy, surely. The sound was lonely and strong at once. It came and went like a ghost. And it always made you feel smaller and older at the same time. When sugar ran low, ingenuity kicked in. Cakes made with applesauce or mashed potatoes showed up at birthdays. You'd nod and chew and pretend it tasted just like the real thing. Mom smiled like magicians pulling sweetness from thin air, and sometimes it really did taste good. Wartime baking meant fewer complaints and more appreciation for anything sweet that made it to the plate. You didn't watch radio. You imagined it. The Shadow Fibber McGee and Molly voices filled your head with full-blown worlds. A creaky door meant terror. A trumpet meant romance. Families sat still, eyes closed, soaking in the story like sunlight. It was a movie without a screen, and when it ended, you felt like you'd gone somewhere. No batteries, just magic waves in the air. Teachers wrote in perfect cursive, every loop crisp, every tail tidy. Chalkboards weren't just tools. They were art shows. You'd get scolded for bad penmanship, not bad grammar. The smell of chalk dust stuck to your sweater, and you'd carry it home like a badge. Even now, you can probably still draw the whole alphabet in cursive with that same stern voice in your ear. Recess wasn't just a break. It was a battle. Boys with buzz cuts, girls in pigtails, and everyone charging out to play jacks. Red Rover or kick the can. You scraped knees, got grass stained, and cried only if it really hurt. The bell always rang too soon. Then it was back to wooden desks and windows that never opened far enough. But recess, that was freedom. Your neighbor's window had a Victory Bond poster in it, worn from the sun, but still proud. Lady Liberty or Uncle Sam, printed in bold colors, stared out at the street. You didn't know how bonds worked, but you knew they mattered. Every time you walked past that window, it reminded you that even the quietest houses were helping win the war. The milkman came early. Glass bottles clinked against each other as he set them by the porch. Sometimes cream rose to the top, thick and pale. You'd fight your sibling for the first pour. A paper cap sealed it up. And if it was winter, the cream might push right out the top in a frozen curl. Cold, quiet, and dependable, like the man who delivered it. Before the papers hit the press, the newsboys were already yelling. Germany surrenders. They cried, running the sidewalks like town criers of old. Folks dropped coins, grabbed copies, and read aloud. Strangers hugged, horns honked. You might not have understood every word, but you knew something had changed. That day, the whole town breathed out at once. The curtains were thick and dark, blackout shades to keep enemy planes from spotting your house. You had air raid drills in school, where you ducked under desks or lined up in the basement. Some kids thought it was a game. Others didn't. The grown-ups didn't say much, but the radio talked about submarines offshore, and that was enough to keep you quiet. A Sunday drive didn't need a destination. Dad packed everyone into the Ford Super Deluxe windows down, your sister's elbow in your ribs. You rolled through farmland, tiny towns, and sometimes just around the block. The world felt bigger when it moved past your window. No GPS, no music, just the hum of tires and whatever thoughts came with the breeze. Movie stars weren't just actors. They were royalty. Bogart, Ball, Cary Grant. They lived on the screen, but felt like family. You clipped photos from magazines, mimicked their lines in the mirror, and swooned over headlines. They smoked, they smiled. They saved the world, at least in black and white. And when they walked down that screen, it felt like they were looking straight at you. At the 5 and dime, you could buy chewing gum, hosiery, and a war bond. Sometimes all in one trip. A little booth with patriotic bunting sat by the register. Folks dropped their coins in like offerings, not purchases. You might not have had much money, but you knew it was going to something bigger. And that made $1 feel like a victory. Moms would quietly swap ration coupons at the corner store. Sugar for meat, coffee for butter. No fuss, no ledger, just a nod and a smile. Everyone understood. You helped who you could, and you never asked twice. It wasn't charity. It was just how folks got by when the shelves ran thin and every dinner depended on a little neighborhood teamwork. Sometimes a soldier would show up at your door, sunburnt, half-smiling, duffel bags slung over one shoulder. No warning, no phone call, just a knock, a ma'am. And suddenly supper was one plate short. You didn't ask what he'd seen. You just poured the coffee, handed him a clean towel, and thanked him like you meant it. Because you did. Metal lunch pails weren't just for kids. They were for dads, too. Painted steel, dented corners, names scratched into the lid. Inside, a sandwich, maybe a pickle. Sometimes a note folded neat as a pocket square. Whether you were off to the schoolyard or the factory floor, that lunch pail was your badge of daily life and your lifeline till quitting time. You knew something was different when the church bells rang midweek. Not for a wedding, not for a funeral, but for peace. Strangers cried, hugged, cheered. Radios blared, windows flew open, flags unfurled. The war was over. It didn't feel real at first. But when your neighbor handed you a bottle of soda and called you kid, you believed it. Boys fiddled with wires, building crystal radios from scavenged parts. Girls clipped headlines, pictures, and letters for war scrapbooks that grew thicker every week. These weren't just hobbies. They were little shrines to a world bigger than Main Street. The static from a homemade radio or the crinkle of old newsprint felt like touching history before it even had a name. That old fan in the window clunked and rattled, but it moved just enough air to keep you sane on a July night. You'd sprawl on the floor with your arms out like a starfish, hoping for a breeze. Ceiling fans were rare. Air conditioning was a fantasy. And sweat, well, that was just part of summer living. When Howdy Doody first aired in '48, half the block showed up to watch. One neighbor had a Philco, the size of a bread box, black and white fuzz and all. Someone stood on the roof yelling, "Hold it there," while fiddling with the antenna. And when that goofy puppet appeared, we laughed like it was magic. Maybe it was. A pound of coffee went for 21 cents, and it wasn't weak either. Folks brewed it dark and strong enough to float a horseshoe. Dad used to say morning smelled like that pot bubbling on the stove. You didn't sip it. You braced yourself, took a swig, and got to work. No one called it artisan. It was just coffee. The grocer knew everybody's name and what cut of beef your mother preferred. He'd tuck a little something extra in the brown paper bag if times were tight. You didn't need a membership card, just a smile and a thank you. He kept the chalkboard up to date, the jokes corny, and the pickle barrel full. That was customer service. Wooden clothespins weren't just for laundry. Kids turned them into dolls, horses, even fighter planes. With a little paint and imagination, anything was possible. You could line them up on the windowsill like trophies. They weren't bought, they were made. And when they broke, you made more. Toys didn't come from a store. They came from the junk drawer. Letters took weeks to arrive and longer to write. Husbands folded them neat as uniforms. Wives sprayed perfume or pressed in a daisy. You read them slow twice, sometimes more. The handwriting felt like a voice, the paper like a hug. Even the envelope mattered. It meant someone somewhere had stopped everything just to think of you. The soda fountain was everything. Milkshakes, gossip, first crushes, and shared fries with 2 straws. You slid onto a red stool, spun in circles, and ordered a cherry phosphate like it was fine wine. The jukebox played softly behind the clink of glass. If you were lucky, the waitress knew your name. And if you were luckier, so did your date. The newspaper hit the porch with a thunk that could wake the dog. Dad always got first crack. Front page, then sports. You waited your turn for the comics. Everyone read something, even if it was just the want ads. News came printed, not pushed. And when it was bad, you didn't scroll past it. You sat with it. Fire escapes doubled as rooftops for dreaming. You'd sneak out there with a book or a soda, legs dangling over rusted rails. They weren't safe, but they were ours. Conversations floated up from the street. Distant radios hummed. The city breathed below. It was the kind of peace only found 3 stories above the noise. A new pair of nylons was like winning the lottery. Real ones, not painted on seams. You'd show them off like a trophy, careful not to snag them on anything sharper than a compliment. Stores kept them behind the counter. Ladies whispered when they found a pair. It wasn't vanity. It was victory in a war made of silk. Ceiling fans turned lazy circles above checkerboard tables at the corner store. You'd buy a nickel soda, sit down, and watch the world wander by. Sometimes the checker game never finished. Too many good stories, too many interruptions, but no one minded. The game was just the excuse to sit a while and stay human. The clerk would wrap your flour, beans, and soap in brown paper and tie it off with string. No plastic, no barcodes, just a pencil behind his ear and a scale that squeaked. You didn't throw those strings away either. You saved them in a drawer because you never knew when one would come in handy. Life magazine came in the mail and lived on the coffee table until every photo had been studied. War scenes, movie stars, inventions from the future. It was all there, bigger than life. You didn't skim, you absorbed. Even the ads felt exciting. Chalk drawings turned sidewalks into worlds, hopscotch lines, treasure maps, even battle scenes with stick soldiers and exploding X's. You played until the chalk wore down to your knuckles. Then you borrowed someone else's. It all washed away in the rain, but that was fine. By tomorrow, it'd be back again. New stories in dusty white. Desks still had inkwells. Though we didn't use them anymore, they held pencils, candy, marbles, whatever fit. Carved initials told stories from classes past. Some had gum stuck under them older than your teacher. The wood was scratched and polished by elbows and time. It creaked when you leaned on it. That desk knew more secrets than it should have. One phone in the house, usually in the hallway. Long cord, rotary dial, no privacy. You'd say what needed saying and hang up. If someone was on the line, you waited or listened. Either way, it was a family event. And if you tied up the line too long, you got the look and maybe the broom. A candy bar cost 5 cents, and that nickel felt heavy with possibilities. You held it in your hand like treasure. Chocolate was rare during the war, but when it came back, oh boy, every bite was a celebration. You didn't wolf it down. You made it last. Even if it melted, it was still magic. Pants came with patches, sometimes sewn on before the knees even ripped. Nobody teased you for it. Everybody had them. Some were cut from old shirts. others from leftover curtains. They were colorful, lumpy, and a little itchy, but they told a story. You didn't throw things out. You fixed them. Clothes had a second life, just like people. The needle dropped on the Victrola, and the living room became a dance hall. You'd spin your sister or sway with your sweetheart, careful not to scuff the floor. The record crackled, the music floated, and even Grandpa tapped his foot. No one said, "Good old days." They just lived them one slow two-step at a time. Mom fed shirts into the wringer washer like a machine operator on laundry duty. You'd watch with wide eyes, terrified your fingers might get caught if you helped. The clothes came out flat as pancakes, ready for the line. The whole house smelled like soap and sunshine. And if a storm rolled in, it was a full family scramble to rescue the sheets. Everyone knew the butcher, the barber, and his boy because they'd all served in the same unit. Their uniforms were tucked away now, but the bond wasn't. You got your hair cut, picked up a roast, and heard the same story 3 ways. It wasn't gossip. It was hometown history, told in short sentences and long silences. The schoolhouse had 3 rooms, 1 bell, and a whole lot of character. You could hear that bell ring clear across the cornfields, and when it did, you ran. One teacher taught every grade and somehow kept order. Spitballs, spelling bees, and chalk dust filled the air, and recess meant jump rope, jacks, and someone getting their feelings hurt. The screen door creaked open just as the war news came on. Supper was on the stove. The air smelled like stew. And Dad turned the dial just in time to hear about some faraway place. You didn't understand it all, but you felt the weight in the room. No one talked much, and even the dog waited quiet. You'd read the comics out loud to your little brother, holding the paper open with both arms like a real reporter. He'd point at his favorite and giggle when you did the voices wrong. Dick Tracy, Little Orphan Annie, and Gasoline Alley. They weren't just ink on paper. They were 10-minute vacations from rationing chores and serious faces. Nothing got thrown away. Not string, not foil, not paper. It all went into a drawer, a tin, or a box just in case. You never knew when the war effort might need it, or when Mom might need it to tie up a roast or wrap a birthday surprise. We didn't call it recycling. We called it being smart. The newsstand looked like it was about to burst. Collier, the Saturday Evening Post, Liberty, True Detective, cover girls, war maps, cowboy tailies, and family recipes, all stacked side by side. You didn't have to buy them to remember them. You just needed to stop, flip through a few pages, and get whisked away for 10 minutes. Lemonade stands weren't cute. They were serious business. A folding card table, a tin cup, and a sign your sister wrote in crooked letters. Real lemons, real sugar, and no cutting corners. You made maybe a quarter, but you felt like a mogul. And when the neighbor paid a nickel and told you to keep the change, pure gold. The dentist's chair was metal and cold. The light was blinding. And the drill, it was powered by his foot. He'd pump like he was on a bicycle, while saying just a pinch, with a smile that didn't help. You gripped the armrest, tried not to breathe too hard, and promised yourself you'd never eat candy again, until Friday. You didn't fully grasp what V-Day meant, but you knew it mattered. Flags waved in the school gym. Teachers smiled with teary eyes, and someone tried to explain it without scaring the little ones. All you knew was that something big had ended, and the grown-ups looked lighter. For once, the world felt like it might be okay. Kids dragged wagons full of pots, bent pans, and old bed springs to the town square. It was the scrap drive, and it felt important. You didn't know what happened to the stuff once it left, but you knew it helped. Even your dad's busted rake got tossed in, and everyone cheered like it had just won a medal. Cold mornings meant huddling near the stove, your hands outstretched and your feet tapping on cold floors. The kindling snapped, The flame danced, and someone always argued over who got the warmest spot. You got dressed in a rush, still shivering. But there was something comforting about the simplicity of it all. Just heat, wood, and routine. Fantasia wasn't just a movie. It was an experience. The music was thunder. The colors were wild. And that broomstick scene, it haunted you for a week. You sat in the dark theater with a jaw full of popcorn and eyes the size of saucers. Disney didn't feel like cartoons anymore. It felt like magic. That might be real. You didn't just dial a number. You talked to the operator. "Number, please," she'd say. And somehow she already knew your aunt lived on Maple Street. Sometimes she connected you fast. Sometimes she chatted first. It was like having a telephone and a nosy neighbor rolled into one. It was just how things worked. Library books had cards in the front and a date stamped in red. You handed them to the librarian, who barely spoke above a whisper, but somehow terrified you anyway. The shelves were dusty, the pages were yellowing, and the silence felt holy. You didn't have to love reading. You just had to respect the hush. The first time someone brought home Tupperware, everyone stared like it had landed from space. You pressed the lid, it made a funny burp, and suddenly leftovers were more exciting than dinner. Mom called it a miracle. Dad said it was witchcraft. Either way, it went right into the cupboard next to the chipped china and the real miracles. A pocket knife wasn't just a tool. It was a legacy. Grandpa gave it to Dad. The blade had scratches. The hinge was stiff, and it smelled faintly of old tobacco. You just slipped it in your pocket and felt about 3 inches taller. Dresses made from flour sacks weren't a sign of hardship. They were creativity on full display. The prints were floral, the buttons were mismatched, and the stitching was all Mom's. Some even came with little butterflies or polka dots if you were lucky. No one laughed because half the class wore them too. It was fashion born of grit. Remember, Pearl Harbor wasn't just a phrase. It was a feeling. Someone would say it softly, and the room would go still. You didn't need to ask what they were remembering. You could see it in their eyes. It was respect, grief, pride, and a silent promise to never forget, even when the world kept moving on. A kitchen floor was linoleum, worn, faded, and soft in spots from years of cooking, dancing, and waiting. It creaked in winter and curled in the corners. You could trace every scuff mark to a story. A dropped plate, a spilled pot, a puppy's first bath. It wasn't fancy, but it was where everything real happened. Mom's iron hissed like a steam engine as she pressed shirts in the sunlight. The board creaked, the cord stretched, and the rhythm never broke. She didn't complain, just moved from collar to sleeve with quiet precision. And when you wore that crisp shirt to church or school, it felt like her hands were still smoothing you down. Milkshakes weren't something you drank. They were something you conquered. Thick enough to bend your straw and cold enough to freeze your teeth. They came in tall metal cups you couldn't quite finish. You'd sit at the soda counter swinging your feet, trying not to spill a drop. That last slurp at the bottom, pure triumph. Posters saying loose lips sink ships were everywhere. School walls, post offices, even church halls. They didn't need to explain it. You just knew. Talk too much, and someone might not come home. It was a strange mix of fear and patriotism wrapped in bold letters and dark colors, and somehow it stuck with you. You needed a church key just to open a soda bottle, and there was always one hanging on a nail by the door. That sharp crack of metal against glass meant a reward was coming. No twist-off caps, no fancy carbonation tricks. Just a cold bottle and a foam mustache if you weren't careful on the first sip. The first time someone handed you a ballpoint pen, it felt like something out of science fiction. No ink pot, no mess, just smooth, endless lines. You clicked it in and out a dozen times just to hear the sound. It cost more than it should have. But boy, did it feel like the future had arrived in your shirt pocket. You walked to the movie theater barefoot in the summer, the sidewalk warm under your feet, and the ticket man waving you through with a smile. It didn't matter what was playing. You came for the popcorn, the fans spinning overhead, and the cartoons that made everyone laugh, even the old-timers in the back row. The root cellar smelled like coal dirt and onions. But it was where the smart ones stored everything from canned peaches to pickled beets. It kept things cool before refrigerators took over. You'd lift the heavy wooden door and step into a quiet stillness that somehow made you whisper, even when you were alone. Quilts weren't just warm. They told stories. Every square came from something. A dress, a curtain, a cousin's old shirt. Grandma stitched them by hand, sometimes humming, sometimes talking about folks you never met. You'd trace the seams with your fingers and fall asleep wondering what secrets were buried in the fabric. Opening a box of Cracker Jack was always a gamble. You didn't care about the snack. You were after the prize. A plastic ring or tiny toy was a treasure. A paper puzzle or sticker, a disappointment. But you still smiled because the box crinkled just right, and your fingers always smelled like caramel after. Ironing boards were more battlefield than appliance. Grandma's had scorch marks from tricks she swore worked better than new gadgets. A sprinkle of water here, a swipe of soap there. She had her own rhythm. You'd watch her glide the iron like it was part of her arm. The smell of hot cotton filling the kitchen. Switchboard operators were like human Facebooks before Facebook. They knew who was home, who wasn't, and who'd been calling the same number twice a day. If you were polite, they might nudge your call through faster. If not, good luck. Everyone joked they knew more than the priest, and they probably did. Sharing one bedroom with 2 or 3 siblings wasn't crowded. It was home. Someone always snored. Someone always hogged the covers. And somehow you made room for a fort, a game, or a quiet talk before bed. You learned how to whisper, how to elbow politely, and how to fall asleep to the sound of someone else breathing. Putting up new wallpaper counted as a full-blown renovation. You'd help mix the paste, line up the edges, and press out the bubbles with a broom handle. Patterns were loud, colors were questionable, but the whole room felt brand new when it dried. Even if the seams showed and the corners peeled, it was your fresh start. Those old roller skates strapped right over your shoes, with buckles that pinched and metal wheels that sang on the sidewalk. You'd wobble down the street with scraped knees and a grin, dodging cracks and pretending you were in a race. If one broke mid-glide, you limped home and begged for Dad's wrench. Kerosene lamps gave off a smell you never forgot. Part warmth, part caution. They hissed when lit and cast a soft glow that made every room feel smaller and closer. In houses still waiting on electricity, they lit meals, bedtime stories, and more than a few late-night card games with Grandpa. Men took their hats off for everything. Prayers, the anthem, a lady walking by. It wasn't a rule so much as a reflex. Even the boys followed suit, clumsily holding their caps to their chests. It didn't matter if it was a battered fedora or a grease-stained ball cap. Respect was stitched right into the brim. The smell of pie cooling on the windowsill made your stomach growl from across the street. Apple, rhubarb, peach. You didn't need to ask what kind. You just stood nearby, pretending not to look until someone handed you a slice. Those pies didn't last long, but the memory of that steam rising in the sun stuck with you. No one worried about raw eggs or sugar back then. If Mom let you lick the spoon after baking, it was the best part of your day. You'd sneak another swipe when her back was turned. And even if your tongue stuck to the beaters, it was worth it. That sweet taste meant love, plain and simple. Firecrackers on the 4th were a mix of joy and panic. You'd strike a match, light the fuse, and run like the devil. Sometimes they fizzled. Sometimes they popped too soon. But when they worked, the whole block cheered. You didn't need fireworks shows back then. Just a brown paper pack and a brave hand. Rag rugs by the door were handmade, worn thin in the middle and patched a dozen times. They caught the dirt from your boots and warmed your toes in the morning. Everyone had a story, whether it came from your aunt's dress or your brother's overalls. Jigsaw puzzles always seemed to be missing one piece, but no one really minded. You'd still spend hours at the kitchen table squinting at cardboard edges and arguing over sky pieces. That last gap just gave you a reason to start another one next weekend. And if the missing piece turned up later, that was magic. Dog-eared Bibles were passed down like heirlooms, with pages marked in pencil and notes in the margins. You'd see your grandfather's handwriting next to a verse and wonder what he was thinking. The cover might be cracked, the binding loose, but when someone opened it, the whole room quieted like it still held every answer. Grandma's sewing machine had a foot pedal that clunked in time with her thoughts. You'd watch the needle bounce, hear the thread snap, and see her fix everything from Sunday dresses to feed sacks. That rhythmic thunk, thunk, thunk was comforting somehow, like the heartbeat of the whole house humming in the corner. The barber pole out front spun slow, red and white stripes blurring as you passed. It was how you knew the shop was open, and probably smelled like aftershave and talcum powder. You sat on cracked vinyl chairs, waited your turn, and always left with a park down the middle whether you wanted it or not. Train tickets came in tiny envelopes you held like treasure. Printed on thick paper with a city name and a date, they smelled faintly of ink and dust. You'd clutch them at the station, eyes wide at the size of the train, feeling like you were going somewhere important, even if it was just 3 towns over. Wooden crates stacked behind the store were building blocks for imagination. Tree houses, pirate ships, lemonade stands. They became anything you needed them to be. If one broke, you nailed it back together. If it didn't, you stood on it anyway. Every splinter was a souvenir from a good idea with poor planning. Sticking your hand out the car window was pure freedom. You'd ride the wind with your palm, pretending it was an airplane wing. The road stretched ahead. The breeze tangled your hair. And nothing felt more like summer than the hum of the tires and the flap of your hands slicing the air. You stood at the train station holding a comic book while your big brother hugged Mom goodbye. He was in uniform. You were in scuffed shoes. And neither of you knew what to say. He just ruffled your hair and boarded. Years later, you still remembered the echo of the train and how the platform felt too quiet after. If these memories warmed your heart, leave a like and don't forget to subscribe, so the stories never fade and always find their way back home. Jigsaw puzzles always seemed to be missing one piece, but no one really minded. You'd still spend hours at the kitchen table squinting at cardboard edges and arguing over sky pieces. That last gap just gave you a reason to start another one next weekend. And if the missing piece turned up later, that was magic. Dog-eared Bibles were passed down like heirlooms, with pages marked in pencil and notes in the margins. You'd see your grandfather's handwriting next to a verse and wonder what he was thinking. The cover might be cracked, the binding loose, but when someone opened it, the whole room quieted like it still held every answer. Grandma's sewing machine had a foot pedal that clunked in time with her thoughts. You'd watch the needle bounce, hear the thread snap, and see her fix everything from Sunday dresses to feed sacks. That rhythmic thunk, thunk, thunk was comforting somehow, like the heartbeat of the whole house humming in the corner. The barber pole out front spun slow, red and white stripes blurring as you passed. It was how you knew the shop was open, and probably smelled like aftershave and talcum powder. You sat on cracked vinyl chairs, waited your turn, and always left with a park down the middle whether you wanted it or not. Train tickets came in tiny envelopes you held like treasure. Printed on thick paper with a city name and a date, they smelled faintly of ink and dust. You'd clutch them at the station, eyes wide at the size of the train, feeling like you were going somewhere important, even if it was just 3 towns over. Wooden crates stacked behind the store were building blocks for imagination. Tree houses, pirate ships, lemonade stands. They became anything you needed them to be. If one broke, you nailed it back together. If it didn't, you stood on it anyway. Every splinter was a souvenir from a good idea with poor planning. Sticking your hand out the car window was pure freedom. You'd ride the wind with your palm, pretending it was an airplane wing. The road stretched ahead. The breeze tangled your hair. And nothing felt more like summer than the hum of the tires and the flap of your hands slicing the air. You stood at the train station holding a comic book while your big brother hugged Mom goodbye. He was in uniform. You were in scuffed shoes. And neither of you knew what to say. He just ruffled your hair and boarded. Years later, you still remembered the echo of the train and how the platform felt too quiet after. Ending, like and subscribe. If these memories warmed your heart, leave a like, and don't forget to subscribe, so the stories never fade and always find their way back home.